What's up, everybody? Woody here. I want to welcome you back. Session 5 of our mission course. This course that we're calling Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? We've been walking through this phrase, 500 women died following the body. And so we've talked about how, with this idea of 500, there were 500 people that claimed to have seen Jesus at one time after his resurrection. Women, that several women were actually the first people to witness and attest to the fact that Jesus was risen from the dead, which at the time would not have been a cultural norm, so it must have been true. Died. That the death of Jesus is one of the most historically reliable facts agreed upon by Christians and non-Christians alike. Now, this idea of following, we're going to talk about how Jesus' followers died for their message. I want to read a little bit more of this passage. We've been kind of rooting ourselves in here during this course. It's in 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to read again from the beginning, but I'm going to read a little bit more. It says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." I remember that's Paul writing there, so he's talking about himself at the end. So in order, Paul writes that Jesus, again, this was a saying that they had. So Jesus appeared. He appeared to many people, but he appeared to Cephas, then to all the 12, the disciples. Then he appeared to more than 500 at one time, most of whom were still alive then. Then he appeared to James, then to every apostle, and then lastly to Paul. So I want to talk about really three different sections of people maybe. The first one is the disciples. Let's talk about them. Really the 11 disciples, because Judas at this point has left Jesus. The 11 disciples, they all claim to have seen Jesus after he resurrected, and actually all 11 of them were persecuted, and all but one of them was martyred or died for what they believed in. The only one to not be killed specifically for their faith was John. Although they tried to kill John, he actually survived the attempted killing, and he survived and was exiled to an island. But all 11 of them claimed to have seen Jesus after he resurrected, preached this message, and were persecuted because of what they believed. Why would they go through that? For something that they knew was a lie? Why would all the disciples be willing to die for something if they knew it wasn't true? Now, an objection or something you might say would be, all types of religions have people that are willing to suffer and die for their beliefs, but that doesn't prove that it's true. Now, I agree with that. That's true. But we need to recognize with the disciples particularly, their willingness to suffer and die for their beliefs seem to be true. But what's special with them is they claim to have actually seen Jesus. This is not someone several hundred or thousand years later just dying for their beliefs. They're dying because they saw Jesus and knew that message to be true. So it really seems unlikely that they're lying. If they lied about the appearance of Jesus, they probably would not have been willing to die for it. Liars don't make good martyrs. Liars don't make people who are willing to die for that lie. Not all of them, at least. I want to share a quote from Paul Fredrickson, who again is a skeptical scholar, not a Christian. She says, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all the historical evidence we have afterwards attests to their conviction that that's what they saw. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know that as a historian, they must have seen something, which I love. It's an amazing quote. I don't know what they saw. I wasn't there, but I must have. I know they must have seen something. They must have seen something. I think it was the resurrected Jesus. Let's talk about Paul, too. Now, remember, earlier in Scripture, in the Bible, the first writings that we see about Paul, the first time we notice Paul, we see him as a very devout, very zealous Jew who was actually persecuting Christians. He didn't like that Christians were kind of flipping the script on what they believed to be the traditional Jewish idea of religion and of God. And so Paul was one of the people persecuting Christians, persecuting people like the disciples. But what changes is we have recordings in several places that at one point Jesus actually has an appearance. He appears to Paul. He appears to Paul while he's traveling. We have reports in Galatians and 1 Corinthians and Acts, all these different books of the Bible detailing the experience that Paul had with Jesus, how he encountered him. So we know that Paul was a devout Jew. He was persecuting Christians. He claimed to have had this interaction where Jesus appeared to him and talked to him. And then all of a sudden he begins to follow Jesus. Instead of being a devout Jew, he's a devout Christian. He goes around and he sets up and plants churches all over. And he's communicating with church leaders and he's helping. He's a missionary. And he shares the message of Jesus. But more than that, he takes his faith so seriously now in Jesus that he suffers for it, that he's arrested multiple times, and he's imprisoned because of what he believes, and ultimately he's martyred. He's killed for his faith in Jesus. Again, why would Paul endure all these things? Why would he go through all these hardships unless he truly believed he had an encounter with a risen Jesus? We have the disciples, we have Paul, and then we have James. James is the most fascinating one to me. When we look at James, we know he's the half-brother of Jesus. They share the same mom, James and Jesus. And in the 1 Corinthians 15 passage, we see Paul writes that one of the people that Jesus appears to is James, his brother. But we also know specifically from other writings in the Bible, in the gospel accounts, that James didn't believe in Jesus before the resurrection, that he didn't trust that Jesus was who he claimed to be. He didn't think that he was the Messiah. He didn't think that he was God. I'm going to read from John chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, where Jesus is doing ministry. He says, "After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of booths was at hand. So his brothers said to him, 'Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world.' For not even his brothers believed in him." Not even his brothers believed in who he was, the works he was doing, things he was doing. So James didn't trust Jesus. He didn't believe he was who he says he was. But after the resurrection, after Jesus appears to James, his life is totally different. James actually converts and becomes a Christian. He's a Christ follower. He believes and trusts in Jesus. He's faithful to Jesus. He actually becomes the leader or the head of the church in the Jerusalem area. And he writes the book of James, a letter in the New Testament that we see in encouraging Christians in it. We see other places in Acts 15 that actually the church as a whole kind of views James as an authority figure, and they ask him his opinion on things and look to him for guidance. He's one of the highest authorities. He's a pastor in the early church in Jerusalem. But we also have historical recordings after that James was actually killed for his faith in Jesus as well. There's a record that shows terribly that he was thrown actually off of the top of the temple, so they would try to kill him from that. He actually survived being thrown off the top of the temple, but they didn't want him to be alive still, so they stoned him and they actually beat him to death with wooden clubs until he was dead. He was martyred for his faith as well. So he goes from unbelief and denial to full trust and willing to live and die for Jesus. Now, one question I love to think about here: what would it take for your sibling to convince you that they were God, right? What would it take for this person that you grew up with? You would know, right? If you're growing up with them and you're like, yeah, I've seen him, like he's lied to my parents and, he's gone around, he's punched me in the face and stuff like that. What would your sibling have to do to convince you that they were God? Probably something amazing, something that doesn't happen, something that almost seems miraculous, something like a resurrection. So, it seems more reasonable and clear than anything that Jesus appeared to his disciples. He appeared to both James and Paul. And they truly believed that Jesus rose from the dead, and they were willing to die for these beliefs. So, 500 women died following the body. 500 witnesses to Jesus after the resurrection at one time. Women are the first to discover the tomb, died. Historical accounts of Jesus' death, we know it happened following. Jesus' followers really believed that they saw a risen Jesus, and they were willing to trust Jesus to death and be killed for it. So this is so important. And there's one last piece of evidence here that we're going to talk about in the next session. We're going to talk about the body. So I want to thank you for watching. We're going to see you in the next session. This next session, we're actually going to have a special guest. He's a mentor of mine. He's kind of an expert on all things resurrection and apologetics and defending the Christian faith. So I know you're going to love what he has to share. We'll have my friend Robbie Lashua teaching our last session here. So make sure you don't miss that. One more time, please, if you don't mind, share this video with someone who needs some encouragement in their faith or has some questions. And we'll see you soon for the last session.